Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know what storm you're standing in right now. I don't know if the bills are piling up, if the doctor gave you a report you didn't expect, if the people you counted on turned their back, or if the doors you prayed for seem locked tight. But I do know this: even when life feels out of control, God is still in control. Even when you don't understand the path, you can trust the one who's ordering your steps. Sometimes God doesn't remove the fire. He steps in and walks with you through it. That's why you're still here. That's why you didn't break. That's why, after everything that's come against you, you still have your praise, still have your strength, still have your mind. Not because life has been easy, but because grace has been heavy. Don't confuse silence for absence. Just because you don't see God moving doesn't mean He isn't working behind the scenes. Too often, we think trust means everything has to make sense. We want God to show us the whole blueprint before we take the first step. But real trust is saying, God, even if I don't understand this season, I'll still walk with you. It's lifting your hands in worship when your heart is heavy. It's choosing peace when everything around you is chaos. It's saying, God, I don't get it, but I know you got me. Do you know when trust is tested? In the dark, when the answers don't come, when the prayers seem delayed, when the breakthrough takes longer than expected. That's where faith is forged. Anyone can trust when the sun is shining, when the doors are opening, when the blessings are flowing. But God is looking for people who say, I don't just trust you in the light. I trust you in the valley. I trust you in the middle. I trust you when nothing makes sense. Sometimes God delays what you're asking for because He's developing what you need. You're asking for the promise. He's working on your posture. You're asking for the blessing. He's shaping your belief. Don't resent the process. You're not being punished. You're being prepared. God is using this tough time to build something in you that couldn't be built any other way. The foundation of your next season is being formed in the fire of this one. I've learned something powerful. Your greatest growth often comes in your greatest struggle. You don't see the strength being built when you're crying yourself to sleep. You don't see the character being formed when you feel forgotten. But heaven does. And God never wastes pain. He never allows a season of brokenness without using it to bring forth something greater. That heartbreak, it birthed compassion. That betrayal, it taught you boundaries. That delay, it deepened your dependence. God didn't bring you this far to leave you now. You may not have clarity, but you do have a calling. You may feel weak, but you have a word. And the word says you are more than a conqueror. The word says He will never leave you nor forsake you. The word says that no weapon formed against you shall prosper. So stop measuring the strength of the storm. Start measuring the strength of your God. He's greater. He's mightier. And He's not done with you yet. Don't let what you see shake what you know. You may see the waves, but you know the one who walks on water. You may see the mountain, but you know the one who moves it. You may see the delay, but you know the God who always arrives right on time. What you're facing is not your finish line. It's a setup, a stage, a spotlight for God to show up in ways you've never seen before. And when He does, you'll look back and say, if it hadn't been for that storm, I wouldn't have known how faithful He is. You're not forgotten. You're not overlooked. You're not abandoned. Heaven is not ignoring you. Heaven is investing in you. Every tear you've cried has watered something. Every prayer you've whispered has moved something. Every time you chose to believe when you could have quit, something shifted. You didn't lose ground in this tough time. You gained ground in the unseen. So hold your head high. Speak life even when you feel low. Worship while you wait. Praise through the pain. Because trust isn't passive, it's powerful. When you trust God in tough times, you invite His power into your pressure. And that's where miracles begin. That's when the chains start to break, the doors start to open, and the healing begins to flow. Not when everything is perfect, but when everything is surrendered. God doesn't ask you to figure it out. He asks you to trust Him through it. He doesn't need your plan. He needs your faith. He doesn't need the pieces to be pretty. He just needs your permission to work with what you've got. And when you give Him your little, He multiplies it. When you give Him your broken, He heals it. When you give Him your trust, He shows you His glory. You may be in a season that doesn't look like the promise, but it is still part of the process. Don't mislabel it. What you think is a loss might be protection. What feels like a setback might be a setup. What feels like an ending might be the very thing God is using to usher in a new beginning. Trust isn't just what you say. It's how you stand. It's how you praise. It's how you keep going when you don't have all the answers. This is not the time to quit. This is not the time to give up. This is not the time to believe the lie that it will always be this way. No, something is shifting. Something is turning. Something is moving on your behalf. Not because you see it, but because you believe it. And when you trust God in the middle of your toughest battles, you're positioning yourself for your greatest breakthroughs. You don't need proof to believe, just the persistence to keep going. Faith isn't about having all the answers laid out in front of you. It's about walking forward even when everything around you says turn back. It's easy to have confidence when you're seeing results, when the doors are opening, when the answers are clear. But real faith shows up when there's nothing visible to support it, when there's no sign, no confirmation, no open window, and yet somehow you still trust that God is moving. People think faith is this emotional high, this unshakable boldness that never wavers. But the truth is, faith often looks like walking through fog. It's continuing to believe when you have every reason to give up. It's getting out of bed when you feel defeated. It's choosing to try again when you've failed before. Faith isn't flashy, it's quiet. It's not always dramatic. It's often a decision in the dark. And it takes more courage to keep showing up with no visible reward than it does to celebrate when everything's working in your favor. There's a reason the Bible says we walk by faith, not by sight. Because if you're living by what you see, you'll be limited by what you understand. But when you walk by faith, you tap into a power that goes beyond logic. You stop relying on the evidence in front of you and start leaning on the promise inside of you. And that's where true strength is developed. Not when everything is confirmed, but when everything is questioned and you still choose to trust. Faith without endurance is fragile. It breaks when the wind blows. It crumbles when pressure hits. But faith that's been tested, stretched, refined, that's the kind of faith that moves mountains. That's the kind of faith that changes lives. That's the kind of faith that heaven responds to. Because God isn't looking for perfect people. He's looking for persistent people. People who keep believing even when it doesn't make sense. People who keep praying even when they don't see change. People who keep worshiping even when they're weeping. If you're waiting for evidence to believe that God is going to come through, you may be waiting a long time. Because faith is the substance of things hoped for, not the evidence of things seen. That means your belief has to be built before the blessing shows up. Your faith has to go first. That's why some people miss what God is doing. They're waiting for signs, but God is waiting for surrender. He's saying, can you trust me even when you can't trace me? When you're walking by faith, you have to make peace with uncertainty. You have to get comfortable with unanswered questions. You have to learn how to carry confidence even in confusion. That's not easy, but it's necessary. Because God often uses uncertainty to build intimacy. He withholds the answer so you'll seek His presence. He delays the outcome so your heart will draw closer. And in the process, He teaches you that His presence is more powerful than any promise you're still waiting on. Faith is a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it becomes. And just like physical training, spiritual endurance isn't built overnight. It's developed step by step, season by season. Every time you choose to trust instead of panic, your faith grows. Every time you choose to stay instead of run, your roots go deeper. Every time you choose to believe instead of complain, heaven takes notice. You're building something far more valuable than answers. You're building unshakable trust. You may be in a season right now where nothing makes sense. You've prayed, you've fasted, you've stood firm, and still it feels like nothing is moving. That's not a sign that your faith is weak. It may be a sign that it's being strengthened. Because God doesn't develop faith in comfort. He develops it in challenge. He develops it in the stretch. He develops it when you're tempted to quit, but choose to stay. That's when you're becoming the kind of person who doesn't just believe in miracles. You become one. Sometimes the evidence comes after the endurance. You won't see the fruit until after you've stayed faithful. You won't see the breakthrough until after you've fought the battle. Don't mistake delay for denial. What you're believing for might not have shown up yet, but that doesn't mean it's not coming. Keep building, keep believing, keep standing, because your endurance is doing something. It's shaking things in the unseen. It's unlocking doors that haven't opened yet. It's preparing you for more than you asked for. Faith isn't just believing that God can do it. It's refusing to give up until He does. It's saying, even if I have to wait, even if I have to walk through fire, even if I have to hold on longer than I expected, I will not back down. I will not let go. I will not be moved. That kind of faith moves heaven. That kind of faith brings answers. And that kind of faith, built through endurance, doesn't just survive the storm. It grows stronger because of it. Sometimes the blessing doesn't show up in what God gives. It shows up in what He withholds. That's a truth we don't always like to hear, especially when we've been praying, asking, and believing for something we truly desire. It's natural to equate God's favor with open doors, green lights, and answered prayers. But some of the most powerful displays of His love come in the form of a no, not yet, or complete silence. Because what God withholds is just as intentional as what He allows. We tend to assume that if it didn't happen, then something went wrong. If the relationship didn't work, if the opportunity didn't come through, if the door never opened, then maybe we missed it. Maybe God changed His mind. But that's not how divine wisdom works. God doesn't operate from a place of confusion or reaction. He doesn't say, no, out of punishment. He says, no, out of protection. What feels like rejection is often divine redirection. He's not keeping something good from you. He's preparing something better for you. Think of all the prayers you once prayed that didn't come to pass. At the time, you might have been disappointed, even heartbroken. But look at where you are now. You survived what you thought you needed. You found peace in the place you once resisted. You grew in ways that would have never been possible had God given you everything you asked for in the moment you asked for it. His withholding isn't random, it's redemptive. There's a discipline in trusting God's wisdom over your own desires. Because sometimes what you want is not aligned with where you're going. You might think you need that job, that relationship, that opportunity to feel fulfilled, but God sees what's ahead. He knows the full picture, not just the portion you're looking at right now. And when He withholds something, it's not because He's forgotten you. It's because He's protecting you from what you can't yet see. This is where spiritual maturity comes in. It's easy to praise God when the blessings are flowing, but real trust is built in the tension. When you don't get the answer you wanted, but you still believe He's good. When the door doesn't open, but you still walk in purpose. When the plan falls apart, but you still find peace in the process. That's not weakness, that's wisdom. That's not failure, that's faith. Sometimes the greatest breakthrough isn't found in what you receive. It's in what you're spared from. There are blessings that come disguised as setbacks. There are miracles in the missed opportunities. And when you have eyes to see it, you'll begin to realize that God's hand was on you the whole time. You weren't being punished, you were being positioned. You weren't being overlooked. You were being overseen by a God who knows how to build your future better than you know how to ask for it. We don't like waiting, especially in a world that celebrates instant gratification. But God isn't bound by human timelines. What seems like delay is often divine pacing. He's not slow. He's strategic. He knows when to withhold because He also knows what He's preparing. Some doors are shut not because they're wrong, but because they're premature. If you walk through them too early, they'll collapse under the weight of what you're not yet ready to carry. When you learn to trust what God withholds, you stop panicking over closed doors. You stop striving to force what's not meant for you. You begin to rest in the truth that anything you have to force was never favor to begin with. Favor flows. It doesn't demand manipulation or fear. And if you've got to compromise your values, your peace, or your joy to get something, it's a strong sign it's not from God. Let's be honest. There are times when it's painful. You prayed with your whole heart. You believed with tears in your eyes. You fasted, worshiped, and waited, and the answer still didn't come the way you hoped. In those moments, it's tempting to feel forgotten, but God never wastes pain. He never overlooks faithfulness. What you see as unanswered, He sees as preparation. You think He's withholding, it might be He's refining. You think you're being denied, but you're actually being developed. Sometimes the withholding isn't about the thing at all. It's about what it produces in you. When you don't get what you want, you learn to depend on what you need. You start seeking God not just for what He can do, but for who He is. That kind of intimacy only comes through surrender. That kind of depth is formed in disappointment. It's in those spaces where your roots grow deeper, where your trust expands, where your identity is solidified, not in what you have, but in who you've become. You can't always see it in the moment, but if you'll keep trusting, you'll look back one day and realize the doors that didn't open were just as sacred as the ones that did. You'll realize that what didn't happen was just as holy as what did. Because in the hands of a wise and loving God, even withholding becomes a gift. It's not a sign of absence. It's a sign of involvement. He's not ignoring your request. He's tailoring your destiny. And when the time is right, what is meant for you will come without striving, without stress, and without delay. Until then, trust what He withholds. It's doing more for you than you can imagine. If you only praise when it's easy, your praise isn't rooted. It's reactive. Anyone can lift their hands when the victory is clear, when the bank account is full, when the healing has come, when the path is smooth. But true praise, deep, unwavering, unshakable praise, is born in the valley, not the mountaintop. It's forged in the fire, not the celebration. It's developed in drought, not abundance. And that kind of praise carries power that shakes things in the unseen. Praise isn't just a reaction to what God has done. It's a declaration of who God is. And who He is doesn't change with your circumstances. His goodness isn't based on your feelings. His faithfulness isn't defined by what did or didn't happen this week. God remains sovereign even when life feels out of control. He remains worthy even when the situation looks unfair. So when you make the choice to praise in pain, to worship while you wait, to lift your voice while everything around you seems silent, that's when heaven leans in. We've been taught to treat praise like a celebration tool, but it's actually a survival weapon. In the Old Testament, there were moments when the people of God didn't go into battle with swords. They went in with singers. Why? Because praise disorients the enemy. Praise shifts the atmosphere. Praise invites the presence of God into places where fear and confusion try to take root. When you lift up praise in the middle of pressure, you're declaring, this situation doesn't have the final say, God does. There's a power that rises up in your spirit when you stop waiting for everything to be perfect to give God glory. When you praise in the prison, you open the door to freedom. When you praise in the delay, you position yourself for a miracle. When you praise in confusion, you make space for divine clarity. And even if nothing changes around you immediately, something begins to change inside you. Praise isn't about denying your reality. It's about declaring a higher reality. Yes, the pain is real. Yes, the loss hurts. Yes, the struggle is exhausting. But praise says, even here, I know God is still good. Even now, I know He's still in control. It lifts your focus from the storm to the Savior. It shifts your mind from the temporary to the eternal. And that shift is where transformation begins. You don't need a stage or a microphone to praise. You don't need a choir behind you or a worship team in front of you. Real praise is personal. It happens in the kitchen when you're wiping away tears. It happens in the car when you're battling anxiety. It happens in the hospital room when the report isn't what you prayed for. It happens in the night when sleep won't come, but the presence of God does. And in those moments, praise becomes more than a sound. It becomes a stand. If the enemy can't take your life, he'll try to take your praise, because he knows that a praising heart is a resilient heart. A worshiping soul is a winning soul. When you refuse to let the weight of life silence your worship, you become dangerous to darkness. Your praise becomes warfare. Your worship becomes a weapon. You're not just surviving, you're fighting back with every hallelujah, with every thank you, with every whisper of God, I trust you. There's a kind of praise that confuses hell. It's the kind that rises up not because of what happened, but in spite of what happened. The kind that says, this hurts, but you're still worthy. This is not what I wanted, but I'll still worship. I don't understand, but I'll still trust you. That's the praise that gets the attention of heaven. That's the praise that invites miracles, peace, and strength that surpasses understanding. You see, God doesn't just respond to need, He responds to faith. And praise is one of the highest expressions of faith. When you praise in lack, you're saying, I believe provision is coming. When you praise in pain, you're saying, I believe healing is on the way. When you praise in silence, you're saying, I believe you're still speaking, even if I can't hear it right now. That kind of faith is precious. That kind of trust is rare. And God honors it every time. Maybe you're in a place right now where praise feels hard. The loss is still fresh. The disappointment still lingers. The outcome still hasn't shifted. But that's exactly where praise holds the most power, because it doesn't take much to praise when everything's going well. But when you can barely breathe, when you feel like you've run out of strength, when you don't even have the words, yet you still whisper, thank you, Lord. That is holy ground. That is breakthrough in motion. Praise doesn't always change your surroundings right away, but it changes you. It lifts your spirit. It strengthens your resolve. It recalibrates your heart back to the truth that God is for you, not against you. That He's working even when you don't see it. That He's present even when you don't feel it. And once you know that, once that becomes real to you, no circumstance can steal your peace. So don't let the trial rob you of your praise. Don't let the silence shut your mouth. Don't let the storm still your voice. You may not have all the answers, but you have access to the one who does. And your praise is a reminder to yourself, to the enemy, and to heaven that you are still standing, still believing, still trusting, and still lifting your voice in worship no matter what comes. You're not forgotten. You're being fortified. That truth can be hard to grasp in seasons where everything feels silent, when your prayers seem unanswered and the path ahead looks more like a question mark than a promise. In those moments, it's easy to assume that delay equals denial, that silence means absence, or that being unseen somehow means being unwanted. But that's not how God works. Just because you're in the shadows doesn't mean you've been shelved. Just because your name isn't being called doesn't mean you've been dismissed. Often, it means God is strengthening what no one else sees, preparing you for what no one else understands. There is a process before the promise. There's a time of stretching before the season of stepping into what's next. God is not interested in rushing you into a position you're not ready to carry. He knows what's ahead, and He knows what it will take to stand there. So, while it may feel like you're being overlooked, the truth is that you're being over-prepared. He's fortifying your spirit, maturing your character, deepening your roots so you won't crumble under the weight of your future blessing. There's something powerful about what happens in hidden places. That's where strength is built. That's where your motives get purified. That's where your identity becomes anchored, not in applause, not in performance, but in the quiet conviction that you belong to God and that His hand is on your life, whether anyone sees it or not. Being fortified is about more than just enduring the weight. It's about allowing God to work in you before He works through you. It's about becoming the kind of vessel that doesn't just carry the blessing, but sustains it. Sometimes God will strip you of distractions so He can strengthen your discernment. He'll allow seasons where you feel isolated, not to punish you, but to prepare you. He's not ignoring you, He's investing in you. And the most valuable investments often happen in silence. Just because it feels quiet doesn't mean God isn't speaking. Just because doors aren't opening doesn't mean nothing is happening. God does His best work in the dark. Just ask a seed. Before it ever breaks through the soil, it must first be buried and broken. That's how it grows. And the same is true for you. There are lessons you can only learn in the wait. There are depths you can only reach when things slow down. If everything moved on your timetable, you'd miss the growth that's happening beneath the surface. You'd rush into platforms without the preparation, into visibility without the vision, into influence without the integrity to hold it up. But God cares too much about your destiny to let you get there unprepared. So He fortifies you. He teaches you to stand when no one's clapping. He teaches you to obey when no one's watching. He teaches you to trust Him, not just for the promise, but through the process. And make no mistake, the process will test you. It will challenge your confidence, stretch your patience, confront your assumptions. But if you stay the course, if you let God do the deep work, you'll emerge stronger, wiser, and more secure than you've ever been. Because the foundation matters. What God is building in your life isn't temporary. It's eternal. And anything eternal takes time to construct. He's not trying to impress people with how fast you rise. He's more interested in how well you stand once you get there. When you're fortified, you learn to stand firm when the winds blow. You don't crumble when criticism comes. You don't shrink when doors don't open. You don't fall apart every time someone misunderstands you. Why? Because you've been fortified in the secret place. You've been strengthened through the struggle. You've been developed in the dark. And now, what you carry can't be shaken by surface-level storms. The world may not see what God is doing in you, but that doesn't mean it's not significant. Some of the most powerful moments in your journey will be the ones no one else witnesses. The nights you prayed when no one knew you were crying. The mornings you showed up, even when you felt like quitting. The choices you made in integrity when compromise would have been easier. Those are the moments that fortify your soul. And those are the moments that God honors. There's a reason certain things haven't happened yet. There's a reason you feel like you're still in preparation. It's not punishment, it's protection. God is fortifying the parts of you that will be needed for the next level. Because what's coming will require more than talent. It will require resilience. It will require wisdom. It will require humility. And that kind of strength doesn't come from applause. It comes from the process. So if you're in a season where it feels like nothing is moving, don't let discouragement take root. Don't assume the silence means absence. Don't confuse hiddenness with insignificance. God sees you. He knows you. And He is fortifying you, not just for where you are, but for where you're going. He's building strength in your spirit, endurance in your character, and depth in your faith. And when the time is right, what He's been preparing in you will be revealed. Not rushed, not forced, not manufactured, but released in power and purpose. God's silence is not God's absence. It's easy to feel abandoned when heaven goes quiet, when the prayers you whisper don't seem to echo back with answers, and the doors you knock on stay closed without explanation. But silence from God doesn't mean He's stopped working. It often means He's working deeper than your eyes can see. We tend to measure God's movement by the noise around us, by how fast things happen, or by how visible the breakthrough is. But God is not limited to human timelines, and He's certainly not confined to loud expressions. Sometimes His greatest works are wrapped in stillness. When God is silent, He's not punishing you, He's positioning you. That quietness is not a rejection, it's a recalibration. It's not the end of the story, it's the part where your roots grow deeper. And if your roots aren't deep, your growth won't last. Trees don't collapse in storms because of what's above the ground. They stay standing because of what's below. And in the same way, when God is quiet, He may be strengthening what can't be seen: your character, your trust, your discipline, your endurance. We don't often talk about the discipline of silence. We celebrate sudden blessings, quick answers, and open doors. But there's a different kind of strength that's forged in the waiting room. That's where God teaches you to walk by faith and not by sight. That's where your praise becomes pure, because it's not based on outcomes, but on who He is. And that's where you learn that trust isn't always loud. It's often a quiet decision you make in the dark when nothing makes sense. God's silence is a training ground. It teaches you to tune your ear to His still, small voice rather than the noise of culture pressure or emotion. It sharpens your spiritual senses. It develops your ability to stand without constant confirmation. That's important because the next level of your calling will require you to follow instructions that don't always come with applause or affirmation. If you only move when God shouts, you'll miss the moments when He whispers. And some of the greatest directions come in the form of a quiet nudge, a gentle prompt, a subtle redirection. Silence sharpens your sensitivity to that. There are moments when God is silent because He's letting your faith speak. He wants to know, will you still obey when you don't understand? Will you still worship when you don't feel anything? Will you still give when you're not seeing a return yet? Will you still believe when there's no evidence on the surface? That kind of faith moves mountains. That kind of trust builds legacy. And that kind of heart makes room for miracles that logic can't explain. Think about how many stories in Scripture involved long periods of silence before the miracle came. Abraham waited years for the child God promised. Joseph was thrown into a pit and left in a prison before he ever reached the palace. David was anointed king, but had to run for his life before he ever wore the crown. And in all those in-between seasons, God didn't give constant updates. He was quiet, but He was present. He was working behind the scenes. He was aligning hearts, shifting circumstances, testing motives, and preparing the stage. And if you're in that kind of season, where it feels like heaven is silent, don't assume God is distant. He's still there. He's closer than you think. In fact, the silence might be the evidence of how near He is. Because when a teacher gives a test, they don't speak. Not because they're gone, but because they're watching to see what the student has retained. And the silence doesn't mean the teacher has left the room. It means the student is being trusted to apply what they've learned. Sometimes, that's exactly what God is doing. He's saying, I've already taught you how to stand. Now I'm going to watch you stand. When you trust God in the silence, you're telling Him, I don't just love what you do. I love who you are. That's relationship. That's depth. That's maturity. Anybody can be faithful when they're flooded with blessings. But it takes someone rooted in truth to keep walking forward when the road is quiet. The signs aren't clear and the answers don't come fast. That's where spiritual muscles are built. That's where trust stops being a feeling and starts becoming a lifestyle. So if you're not hearing what you used to, if the way God is moving feels unfamiliar, don't panic. Don't jump to conclusions. Don't start believing the lie that He's forgotten you. Silence doesn't mean He's stopped. It may just mean He's doing a deeper work. He may be preparing something so significant that it requires time, alignment, and surrender. And He may be building a version of you that can hold the weight of what's to come. Trusting God in silence isn't about denying how you feel. It's about deciding who you'll follow. It's about saying, even if you don't say another word right now, I'll still believe what you said last. It's about anchoring your faith, not in the noise of what's happening, but in the truth of who He is. And when you do that, you move from needing signs to walking by the Spirit. From needing clarity to walking in confidence. From needing constant affirmation to standing in settled assurance. God's silence is never wasted. It's sacred. It's strategic. And it's shaping something in you that noise never could. You're not being overlooked. You're being refined. You're not stuck. You're being strengthened. And when the silence lifts and the door opens, you'll realize that everything God was doing in the quiet was preparing you for the loudest breakthrough yet.